All right, it's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for attending the Liquor and Cannabis Licensee Training. This is the 10th year that we've provided this training, and the purpose is to help Pullman businesses comply with licensee requirements. And we also want to partner with you to ensure responsible liquor and cannabis use in Pullman. I'm Gary Jenkins, Pullman Police Chief. Today we'll have presentations by Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board Officer Kevin Lillard, and also Pullman Police Department Commander Jake Opgennorth. I have all the attendees muted at the moment. At the end of each of their presentations, I will unmute everyone, and we can have a question and answer session at the end of each presentation, and again at the end of both presentations. Law enforcement is typically associated with really the enforcement only, but our ultimate goal is compliance. So there's various ways to achieve compliance other than enforcement. That includes education and prevention. So today's part of that non-enforcement effort to facilitate compliance. I do want to let you know that every year we do conduct undercover operations, particularly focusing on sales to minors and also over service. But the bottom line is we want you to be compliant, and today is one of the ways that I think that we can help you to be compliant. And beyond today, I also want to offer any assistance that we can to you and your business. So if you ever feel there's a need for some assistance from us or some additional training, we'd be happy to come out and work with you and your staff. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Liquor and Cannabis Board Officer Kevin Lillard.
Good afternoon. My name is Officer Kevin Lillard. I'm an enforcement officer with the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board. Before I get started, Chief, can you hear me okay?
Yes, your sound is good.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint presentation to help guide us through here. And Chief, can you see that on your screen?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Okay. Just a little bit about me. I've been working with the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board since about 2016. Prior to that, I was a deputy sheriff with the Spokane County Sheriff's Office. Mainly worked patrol there for a couple years, and before that, I was actually security forces in the U.S. Air Force doing law enforcement. Before we dive into this, make sure everything's working correctly. Bear with me. There we go. Course topics, general information about age-restricted products. We're also going to cover general information about laws and rules, who can purchase age-restricted products, what are the penalties for selling to a minor, how to properly check identification, and also how to detect fake IDs. That's kind of a fun part of this. Acceptable forms of ID, Washington ID security features, fraudulent use of ID, and compliance checks. And for those that don't know, compliance checks in the restaurant bar industry, a lot of times it's referred to as a sting. We don't use that terminology. So when I say compliance check, that's basically us making sure you guys aren't selling to minors. If you have any questions during this presentation, I just ask that you would wait till towards the end and go ahead and text my my work cell phone there, and then I will answer it. The only caveat to that is due to time constraints, I'm not going to be answering any COVID-19 phase or restriction questions. I could sit here for 8 hours and answer those. Please reach out to your local enforcement officer for further info, which is either Dale Goldman or Officer John Christner on the cannabis side, and they can give you any information you have pertaining to that. So just one thing I ask is just that you please just keep it on topic with responsible alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis sales. What are age-restricted products, according to the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board? So age-restricted products are goods for which there's a minimal legal age to buy. So liquor, tobacco now is 21, a big change. Vapor products are also 21, and marijuana products. The only caveat to that is medical marijuana, which is 18, or it can be younger than that if they are accompanied by their provider. By provider, I mean doctor. So Just the only caveat to that one. Just kind of covering the legal mumbo jumbo here. State law describes mandatory actions employees and licensee must follow. State law is determined by the state legislature or initiative. For the purpose of this training, state law refers to a revised code of Washington, which we can see RTW, and then Washington Administrative Code, which we call it WAC for short. And that's a lot of the LCB laws and regulations that we enforce are the WACs. And basically the state laws that kind of pertain to what we're talking about here is unlawful any person to sell liquor to any person under the age of 21 years or permit any person under the age to consume liquor on his or her premise. So on that one, just remember that selling to a minor is just as bad or the same charge as if it's a 21 and over restricted premise and you allow them to frequent or stay in there for, you know, a prolonged amount of time, it's the same charge. So minor frequenting will get you in just as much trouble as selling to a minor. And then the next RCW is every person who sells, gives, or permits to be sold or given to any person under the age of 18 years any tobacco in any form is guilty of it. So the one above it is also a gross misdemeanor as well for liquor. Store policy, those can end up being more restrictive than state law. A lot of times I get asked about, am I required to check everyone's ID? And the answer to that is no. The state law doesn't state that. You just can't sell to a minor. But there's many stores that enact a policy, and you'll see that quite prevalent in the cannabis industry, and that's to protect them and their employees because it is such harsh penalties for selling to a minor. And then just kind of a couple examples there of store policies. A lot of times you'll see a lot of grocery stores and major chains will have the policy to check every single ID of the person coming through the door. Us, we do not require you to check a 90-year-old man or woman's ID if it's blatantly obvious they're over 21. Just remember that it's on you to ensure that you don't sell to minors. Keep in mind this PowerPoint's kind of intended for in-person. So there's kind of some quizzes in here, but I'll kind of just answer them. Is it a right or privilege for customers to purchase age-restricted products? It is a privilege, just like driving in the state. It's a privilege, it's not a right. So you always have the right to refuse service to anyone in your establishment. And we always like to say when we're in the LCB, when in doubt, don't sell. I don't think you're never going to get in trouble for us if you just flat out will not sell to someone because something doesn't seem right. But if you make a mistake and do sell to them, that's where you can get in a lot of trouble. So always keep that in mind. And I'll probably say that I'll kind of beat that one into the ground a couple times. When in doubt, don't sell during this presentation. What are the penalties for selling to a minor? Selling age-restricted products to a minor may result in criminal charges being filed against the person who sold. And those are the two RCWs that apply there. That means the employee may be placed under arrest and charged with a criminal offense. You may have to obtain a defense attorney to defend yourself. That costs a lot of money. You may have to appear in court. You may be fined or in prison. You may lose your job. I see a lot, that last one, you may lose your job. There's a lot of companies that will fire people on the spot for failing a compliance check. That's up to the employer. I do see that quite a bit. But just know that if you do fail a compliance check or we do find you selling to a minor, we're going to be writing you a criminal citation. You will have to go to court on that one. And it's not just on the Liquor and Cannabis Board. Local authorities can and do as well. I know Pullman PD can, even state troopers, other, deputy sheriffs as well. They can all write that as well. It's not just me. Selling age-restricted products to a minor or allowing a minor to enter and remain upon the prohibited area of a premise may result in fines or suspension of the retail license. So this is going to hit the actual business and the actual licensee or the person that actually holds that liquor license. They're going to be looking at either a fine or they're going to be looking at a suspension. A suspension is basically for like a 7 or 14-day period. They can no longer sell alcohol, and we'll actually go and post signs. And if they violate that, it can end up even losing their license indefinitely. So it's very steep repercussions on violating that. You may have to also, they also have to attend administrative hearings, financial hardship, and may have to lay off employees as well because of these. We've only had one, well, it does happen, but eventually if you get accumulation of public safety violations, it will end up resulting in a revocation of the license, excuse me, not a suspension. Checking identification. What if I am unsure? If you are ever unsure about an ID or age of person purchasing age-restricted products, what should you do? Do not sell, like I was just talking about earlier. You're the person there selling the product, you're responsible for every single sale of age-restricted products you make. If you're unsure about the person's age, do not sell. Another little quiz thing here. We always like to put this up and go, who do you think is over 21? They're all kind of youthful appearing. There's some that look kind of older. Funny thing is, none of them are over 21 because we didn't check their IDs. We don't know. So just something to keep in mind. When you looked at the persons of the previous slide, did you have to guess their ages? Of course, we all did because we didn't know who they were unless we knew them personally. And kind of the moral story is here, if you're not checking ID, at some point you're going to sell to a minor whether you know it or not. And eventually you might get caught. So this is a little scenario. A youthful appearing person enters a retail store and approaches a sale counter attempting to buy an age-restricted product. A brand new employee in training takes the ID, but not knowing how to check it, hands it to their trainer. The trainer glances at the ID and says the person is old enough to buy. The trainee then rings up the sale, takes the money, and provides the age-restricted product to the person. After the person leaves, a law enforcement officer is into the store and reports that the store failed a compliance check by selling to the minor. Who do you think is legally responsible for selling to the minor? So, unfortunately, it's actually the person that actually did the exchange of money and actually completed the transaction. So, don't take someone else's word for it. And, you know, if someone else checks the ID and then says they're good and then has you ring it up, I would say, hold on, let me make sure real quick and look at the ID. And I've actually seen that happen in a compliance check where it was like kind of a change of shift where person checked the ID, they said they were good, and then they were changing tills out and the person took over. And unfortunately, I had to write the ticket to the person that actually completed the sale because they didn't even check the ID and they're the ones that legally completed the transaction. So just be cognizant of what's going on and, you know, look out for each other and your other employees there. Make sure if you're the one selling it, that you know that they're over 21. And that can come into effect with like bouncers. So if a bouncer checks their ID and then they get inside, it's not the bouncer that's going to get the ticket. It's you, the bartender. So if they look, you know, youthful in appearance, you should be checking their ID to make sure that they're not, you know, under 21. And I've seen that one happen as well. So just make sure we're checking IDs and we're not selling to minors. And this is, I kind of touched on this earlier, you know, are you required to have them present ID? And there's no state law requiring that you have to, but the state law just is read that, that you cannot sell to someone under those ages. But store policy can dictate otherwise. A good example of not, you know, needing to, I always tell people make sure you check ID, but say you've got John Smith. John Smith is 80 years old. He comes into your convenience store on every Thursday at 3 p.m. and he buys his 6-pack of beer. And he's been doing this for the last 5 years. You've checked his ID. You know you probably even rattle off his birthday. You don't have to ask for his ID. It's kind of common sense here, but just make sure we're not, you know, selling to minors. So, but if your store policy directs that you will check everyone's ID, by all means, follow your employer's requests and policies. We're going to go over real quick here how to check an ID. First, ask the customer to hand you their ID. don't, you know, a lot of people like to keep it in their wallet because it's a pain to slide out of there, but you'll really miss a lot of the safety features and catching if it's a fake or not unless you actually handle it. Because a lot of times the thickness and dexterity of it is a lot of times how I can detect if it's actually a fraudulent ID. Only accept authorized or acceptable forms of identification. We'll get into that in just a minute here. Verify the photograph on the ID matches the customer in front of you. So there's a lot of times where I've actually encountered this down here. Their sorority sister or you know, fraternity brother or what have you, they look kind of similar, and they'll let them use their ID and try to use it at the bar to get in. And you can kind of quiz them on other things on the ID to kind of see if it's genuine or not. Verify the date of birth on the ID equals over 21. Check the ID is not expired, and verify other security features. That's an example of kind of Washington ID. I know they're changing here. Actually, they just recently changed. What about a hole punched in the ID? I get this one quite a bit. At some point, you may receive an ID with a hole punched in it, and the ID may be legal provided the punched hole does not obstruct any of the required identifying information. In other words, you can see their face, you can see what they look like, and read their date of birth, physical descriptions, and their signature is not punched out. It's still valid. And a lot of times they'll have another piece of paper with it if it's like a temp, you know, with like a temp. And on the subject of those temporary licenses, you'll see them now. It's just a printed out piece of paper. You can only accept that if they have their old ID with them, and it'll usually be expired. And if the two match up. So just the paper by itself is no good. I can go down to Kinko's and photocopy things all day. So, and you won't know who I am. But if you're in doubt, the golden rule is do not sell. I'm not sure, I think maybe one or two of the clubs down here may have the scanners. This is kind of just a tool to help with checking IDs. And basically it just uses the algorithm on the back of the barcode on the ID that pulls the date out of there and kind of runs some numbers and then sees if it's genuine. It's not a catch-all. There are some really good fake IDs that actually can dupe these. A lot of times it's verifying what it says on the scanner and what actually says on the ID. For example, I have a scanner on my cell phone that's law enforcement based, and I had one that the person's name was, I think it was like Jose Gonzalez, and it said they were 46 years old. And I'm looking, and they were Hispanic, and I was looking at a white female that was very youthful in appearance and had, you know, fair skin, blonde hair, and I'm like, this is not the same person. So just, you know, use common sense and make sure the two things are kind of matching up. And then don't ever override like point of sale systems. I see that a lot where people fail the compliance checks where if it's not letting you sell, that's kind of a red flag. You know, make sure you always put in the correct birth date. Don't put in your birth date or put in 000. Make sure you're actually using the correct date. And if it's not letting you sell, there's probably a good reason. It's probably they're not old enough. So use the technology to your advantage. There's some ID checking tools. There's an ID checking guide that kind of has different states' IDs in there. Those are available. You can get them online. You can reach out to your local enforcement officer as well, and we get you the info on ordering one of those. That really helps with out of state IDs, which you will come in contact with here in a college town. One of the big things is make sure you're wearing your glasses. It's got a little print on there, so then you're not, you know, misconstruing some of the words and misreading things. Use a magnifying glass if needed. Date reminders for determining age 21. Those are the stickers that we give out this year. They're kind of white, and it says on this date, you know, this date and this year, you know, they're over 21. Those make it really quick and easy, especially for bartenders. You can look at the sticker and see if they're good to go. Black lights. There are some security features with black lights, but the people that make fake IDs, they're catching on. They put some of those features in there as well. They won't be as crisp though, and they won't, if you compare them to a real ID, they'll look a little fuzzy and won't look as pronounced or as clear as the real thing. So just know that the black light's not a catch-all. They're putting some of those security features in there as well. What are the acceptable forms of ID? Per state law, driver's license, instruction permits, enhanced ID card issued by any U.S. state, territory, District of Columbia, or Canadian province. So Canadian provinces, because of our relationship with Canada and the ability to run a lot of the same criminal history information, we do. That's the only other country that we accept driver's licenses and IDs from as valid IDs. Now, say they're from Venezuela or Germany, they can present their passport or passport card. That's perfectly acceptable. And valid U.S. Washington State temporary driver's license when presented in conjunction with corresponding expired Washington driver's license. Like I said, they got the temp, they got to have their old one. U.S. Armed Forces ID card. On military IDs, the date will be on the back. Merchant Marine ID card issued by U.S. Coast Guard. You won't see those too much over here. It's more of a West Side thing. All the ports over there, but you could. And they are, excuse me, they are legal and good to go. Like I said, passports. There are some tribal enrollment cards that are approved. You have to go on our website, lcb.wa.gov, search for tribal identification, and it'll be on there which ones are acceptable. Be very careful on that. There's only certain tribes, and if you're not sure and you're busy, you can ask for another form of identification. For example, if they drove there, they're still going to need to have a driver's license. So just be careful on those ones. Not every tribal ID is acceptable, valid ID. These are some of the new formats that have just come out. You've probably seen those quite a bit. The driver's license, one of the biggest changes is the driver's license number. It's not a PIC number anymore, and that's because, according to DOL, we've run out of combinations of that, so they've had to go to an actual driver's license number, which some other states have those as well. So I just covered that basically on your. That's the new ID number format. You read more about that on the DOL website. There's a couple new colors on the ID. And then most people know about enhanced driver's licenses. You'll see those quite a bit. That's just more security features so that people can cross federal ports of entry and also for flying and things. There used to be a military driver's license. Those are no longer issued. They used to not have an expiration date. Those are no longer being issued. But if you see one, it's probably really old. These are some of the older formats. These are some of the features that are built into the Washington driver's license. Some of you may have been familiar with the 100 rule. If you take the first two numerals on the driver's license number and the last two digits of the date of birth, it'll add up to 100. So don't take this as a grain of salt. It's not a catch-all, because guess what? The people who make fake IDs, they've figured out how to do math as well, and they factor that in. So I've actually seen fake IDs that have that in there. And on the subject of fake IDs, the ideology behind it is most people that are going to get a fake ID, they're going to get one that's out of state. That probably your bouncers don't see a lot around here. For example, something over in New England or in the South. They're probably not going to use Idaho or Oregon, but we do see those because they want to be able to fool the person looking at it. Well, it looks kind of legit, but I haven't really seen a North Carolina driver's license before. So that's kind of one of the first signs that makes me kind of go, this could be fake. Is okay, it's an out-of-state driver's license. If someone really knows what they're doing, they're going to get an out-of-state driver's license. We look at Washington IDs every day. I do. You know, really quickly, it's easy to determine if they're kind of fake. At least for me, I look at them all the time. But I mean, those of you that are bartenders, bud tenders, or grocery store workers, you guys look at them all the time. The red flag, the spidey senses, for lack of a better term, should be going up when you got an out-of-state ID card and someone that looks youthful. It may not, don't always generalize, think they're all going to be fake, because obviously you got a lot of kids from out of town here and out of states, but just that's kind of the ideology, is you want something that is going to be easy to pass by. And these fake IDs, most of the kids, they can take the photo themselves, like in their dorm room, and they send it off. These companies are in China, and I think it's between about $100 and $200. They can get 3 fake IDs, and I have a lot of people ask me, well, how can they legally do that? Well, 1, they're in another country, and 2, they sell them as a novelty. So they're not saying to use them, it's just for fun. So unfortunately, the fake IDs are a problem. They're probably going to be a problem unless rules clamp down even more on them. But that's kind of the world we live in. There's always going to be college kids trying to use fake IDs, but hopefully some of the information I give you will help with that. And I apologize, because in an in-person class like this, I let you guys handle fake IDs, so you can kind of get a gist of kind of what to look for and how to feel. Next time your enforcement officers, by doing a check, ask them if they have any fake IDs, in their car that they can come and show you. And usually we will have some that we've confiscated, and we can show you, kind of some IDs on especially what's currently being circulated, say that school year. So reach out to your local officer, Dale or John, and they can show you some examples of the space if you've never been able to see any of those from us when we do one of these presentations. So the vertical ID, that means the person was a minor when they were issued their ID or driver's license. So a little way to help you on your passing your compliance checks, which we do it, your local police department can do them as well. The minors that work for the state that we use, they all look youthful in appearance. I'm not going to send someone in that's 7 foot tall and has a beard and looks like a lineman for the Green Bay Packers or something. And they're going to have a vertical ID, and it's going to be a real ID. We don't send them in with a fake ID. We cannot do that. So they're going to use a real and genuine ID, and it's going to be vertical format. So there's a lot of establishments that actually won't accept vertical IDs. I know a lot of the marijuana industry doesn't, just to keep themselves out of trouble. Now, that's not a state law. That's just store policy. I understand that you're going to have a lot of students and things that have just just turned 21 and they haven't had time to go get their new ID yet. So that's totally your guys's policy on how you want to handle that. But just know that that's one more tool you guys can stay out of trouble from failing a compliance check. As you can see on the screen, if you notice on the ID it says age 18 on, 5/5/2017. Don't get tripped up on that, because some of them say age 18 on, some of them say age 21 on. So I always just go by the birth date and then check it with those stickers that we give you, and go that route, because I see a lot of people that they'll confuse that and they end up making a sale and getting in a lot of trouble. So this is the old horizontal format. There is some micro printing in that line that's underneath Washington. If you have a magnifying glass, you can look at the seal and then kind of the branches behind there. These are kind of easier to duplicate and make fakes of, but usually you'll find out with it's either too thin or too thick, or it looks really glossy in appearance. Those are some things that I'm looking at. And another thing is, when I'm handling an ID, if it looks really glossy or looks really thick, I start actually using my thumbnail, and I'll actually peel at the corner of the ID. If this is a business card, but if it was a corner of it, I actually will peel at the corner of it, and it'll start peeling off. And the reason being is it's really hard for these guys that make the fake IDs to get the technology to lay this piece of laminate over it. It has a lot of the holographic features in it that you'll see on a lot of the IDs to make it look genuine. So a lot of times when you hold it at a glance, it'll almost look holographic or have kind of sheen or a different color to it. And you'll actually be able, a lot of fake IDs, be able to peel the corner of it up. Or if you start bending it back and forth, it'll actually start to crease that plastic over the top of it. That's another telltale sign of a fake ID. And that's the old vertical format. You'll be seeing less and less of these as time goes on. That's what one of the new temporary licenses look like. It's just a printout, like I said before. It is only valid with, you know, their driver's license that's already is expired or been punched to go along with it. It by itself is not valid identification. That's kind of an idea of what the ID, Washington IDs look like with black light held against it. Just keep in mind that they will be kind of blurry if they are fake, but the fakes do that as well. These are kind of the two methodologies or you know, crime prongs of using a fake ID, and that's either presenting another person's real ID as your own, so that's like using your big brother's ID and you kind of look alike, or presenting a manufactured fake or altered ID. Kind of just already covered that. You also see a lot of times, we call it the handoff. So someone is using their real ID in line to get into a bar and is really theirs, and then they'll hand it off to the person behind them who looks very similar, and they'll try to use it as well. So just kind of be cognizant of that. If you see a duplicate of the same thing come through, kids try all kinds of crazy stuff, and a lot of times on your ID scanners, it'll warn you if it's a double scan for that reason. Here's kind of some IDs, some examples of some fake IDs from other states. Connecticut's a big one. Oregon you'll get. Florida's really big. It's just because they're kind of easier to mimic. Like I said, they're going to want to use an out-of-state ID because you're less familiar with them. Again, just kind of as a little recap here, make sure you actually are handling an ID, make sure they hand it to you, take it out of the purse, take it out of the wallet. Verify the photo ID and description matches the person in front of you. And if it doesn't, ask them why. And I've met a really good bouncer in Spokane that he is extremely good at spotting fake IDs at some of the college bars that he works at. And a lot of times it's not necessarily the ID, but it's him quizzing them on what the ID is. So say he's presented an ID and it's from Florida, and John Smith, you know, lives in St. Augustine, Florida, and he goes, "Oh, so you live in St. Augustine, huh?" And the kid goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "So what's the area code? You know, what's the phone number area code in St. Augustine?" And if you get an probably a good idea that it's a fake ID. People that really are from areas, they're going to know, roll off the top of their tongue, everything about that. And ask them about their neighborhood, different things like that. Quiz them about, you know, with the address on there or other things. So that's kind of a good way, just to kind of get a feel of it, to feel if, you know, that they're being fictitious and presenting a fraudulent ID. Like I said, listen to your intuition. If it feels off, let the person's ID, don't sell them. And more on that subject here. Ask for other documents with their name, address, or photo on it. You can also have the person sign their name on a separate piece of paper, but a lot of times they submit to these fake ID companies their actual real signature. That kind of only works if they're trying to use someone else's ID. That's another tool for you. Use the ID checking guide and ask for another form of ID if they have it. We don't really see a lot of photocopied IDs anymore. That's kind of old school stuff. Like I said, feel for damage, peeling cracks or split card edges, misspelled words. Kind of funny. You can check the UV ink with a black light. And like I said before, never override the point of sale system. If it's telling you don't sell, don't sell. Things to consider before you confiscate a fraudulent ID. An ID, real or not, is personal property. State law only allows law enforcement officers to detain persons or seize property to determine if they are of age to purchase age-restricted products. If you believe a fraudulent ID was presented, you can record the ID and tell the person you're calling the police to verify the ID. If the person flees or abandons the ID, you must turn it over to law enforcement officer. You can turn it over to us, LCB, or you can check with the PD here, and if they'll take it as well as abandoned property. That's going to be up to them, but we will take them as evidence. I cannot stress this enough. It is never worth a physical injury or altercation to hold on to a fraudulent ID card. If they want to get crazy with you, just give it back to them. It's not worth it. It's a little misdemeanor crime. Just call it in or let us know about it. But never, risk your personal safety. Is not worth us writing a little fake ID ticket. Your safety is way more important than that. And then back on the subject of compliance checks, or you guys like to call them stings. The Liquor and Cannabis Board conducts compliance checks, or stings, as people like to call them, to promote public safety by testing whether retailers are following state law prohibiting minors from entering and remaining upon, which is we call frequenting, the restricted area of premise, and from minors being sold age-restricted products. And this could be something as simple as it's just time to check you guys. A lot of times we do it randomly, or it can be also complaint-driven. So if someone calls in a complaint to Olympia, and then it gets forwarded to us that, hey, bar XYZ is selling to minors, we have a duty and obligation to go investigate that. And one of the tools we can use on that is a compliance check. This is an example of, she's since aged out. She's no longer under 21, so she can't work as a investigative aid. But this is an example of like one of our investigative aids. We employ minors. They actually work for us, work for the state. We've given them training on how to conduct these investigations. They're always going to look under 21 years of age. They're not going to look deceptively mature, and I've actually had some where they came into work and I was like, you're going to have to go change because you look way older than what you look like right now. They'll present either a real ID or no ID at all, and so if they don't present an ID and you ask them over 21, they can lie and say that they're over 21 because you don't know. You're going to believe everything tells you. So, but they cannot present a fake ID. So we don't expect you to be experts on the fake IDs. Just be aware of them and do the best you can. But we're never going to present a fake ID to you during a compliance check. And they're going to be a vertical ID too, just FYI. Why failures occur? People fail compliance checks for a number of preventable reasons. Here's just kind of some examples. They did not know how to check ID properly. They miscalculated the date of birth. I see that quite a bit, especially when they're busy. There's a line of people going out the store and they're kind of flustered. They've had a bad day. They're tired, and they do the math wrong. So just take your time, and double check. Distracted, hurried, and attentive. They could not read the ID without their glasses on. They didn't use the ID checking tools, and they didn't use the technology, or they overrode the technology. If you're unsure about the age, it doesn't look right, don't sell. We're going to touch a little bit on over service. And this mainly pertains to your on-premise liquor licenses. But overservice is defined a person showing apparent signs of intoxication while possessing, consuming, or having alcohol sold to them. So keep in mind that the two prongs of getting in trouble with or violating the law of overservice is in signs of intoxication and possession. So someone just drunk in a bar is not overservice. That's just someone intoxicated, and technically, that as long as they're not being disorderly, they can stay there. They can, the bartender can give them water, offer them some food, try to get them a ride home, take care of the person. But just because they're necessarily intoxicated or showing signs of intoxication is not necessarily over service. They have to be actually engaged in drinking or in possession of the drink. So that's a big, big caveat to that. Overservice is a common term in the liquor industry. The legal term is apparently intoxicated. That's the standard required under RCW 6644-200 and WAC 314-16150. And that's going to be decided when the patron needs to be cut off. Apparently intoxicated means a person does not have to be drunk. The signs of intoxication that are viewed do not have to be obvious, just apparent. I'll touch a little more on that. Some alcohol, keep in mind, alcohol acts as a depressant to the central nervous system, and signs of intoxication are careless, clumsy finger, dexterity, unsteady walking, droopy eyes, drowsy, slurred speech, annoying or over-friendly, aggressive, argumentative, inappropriate advances, strong odor of alcohol or marijuana, and speaking too loudly or softly. Usually you're not just going to have one of these signs, it's usually going to be an accumulation of those. Now, one time where I did have, where it was only one signs of apparently intoxicated, where obviously the person was overserved, was the person was passed out drunk on the bar, head down, had a drink still in their hand. That's pretty obvious. But aside from that, it's usually going to be a number of these things. Like I said, you're usually going to have two or more signs of that intoxication, like we talked about. And it just touched on that. I'll skip through it. If a patron in your premise is showing apparent signs of intoxication, you cannot serve them alcohol, sell them alcohol, or allow them to possess or consume alcohol. And this also applies to your off-premises as well. So if someone's drunk in line showing these signs and you're at the grocery store and they're trying to buy a six-pack of beer, you can't sell to them. Same rule applies there. It means you have to cut off the person's service, no last drink, and you have to take the alcohol away. So that's a big thing. There's no, oh, that's their last one. Once they've reached that point, you actually have to pull the drink. They can remain on the premise. However, if the person gets more alcohol, like if they're taking it from other people, being disorderly, you're responsible. So they're probably gonna have to go at that point. If you decide to deny the sale or service to alcohol to a patron, here are some general guidelines. Be polite. Remember that people have been drinking, have potential to lose their sense of reasoning. Yeah, and they're going to want to fight you. Tell the person that state law requires you to stop alcohol sales, service, possession when the signs are exhibited, and blame state law. Be like, hey, I'm going to lose my job. If I, get caught, over serving you, liquor. I've even had people go, point out in the parking lot to a car and go, I think that might be LCB out there and I don't want to get in trouble. Also let them know you value them as a customer. You can offer some food, like for example, if you just poured them a drink and they took 2 sips and now they're showing signs of intoxication, you pull their drink, maybe you could offer them some food or something to, kind of, help them out. I don't know. Don't argue, but be firm. You can also sell them a non-alcoholic beverage. Offer them to call them a ride, Uber, ride share. Help these people out. Do your best you can to prevent, drunk driving. Disorderly conduct. So, in which the overservice thing can eventually turn into disorderly conduct too, as an aside. You may not drink alcohol while on, well, that's talking about like if someone is fighting, you can't allow them to be there. But you guys as bartenders, bar owners, store owners, you may not drink alcohol while on duty. This includes performing any acts of employment while consuming alcohol, whether you're officially working on the clock or not. So run into problems with this where bartender gets off, they just got off duty, another bartender took over, so they're sitting there having, beer after their shift, which is allowed as long as they're not being, intoxicated, apparently intoxicated. And then the bartender that's working gets busy, or they have to run to the restroom and someone, you know, needs help and they get up and get them a drink real quick. That's where you run into the violation of disorderly conduct. So when you're off duty, you're off duty. Keep you guys out of trouble there. And basically, like as far as fighting goes, if there's a fight at your premise, obviously you're probably going to be calling the PD, but don't just kick out the person that started it or the primary aggressor. Both parties have to go. And the reason for that is, there's been lots of studies on this, is you let one party stay. Well, guess what? The other person that's pissed off is their car and retrieve a weapon, firearm, and then now you've got a violent scenario that's going to happen inside your bar or out in the parking lot. So the best thing to do, fortunately, is to kick both parties out and just, you know, save yourself some of that liability. The last prong on there, I won't touch too much on that, but basically can't show any of the private areas or simulated sex acts on your premise while serving alcohol. You can't engage in or allow disorderly conduct to occur or allow disorderly patrons to remain in your premise. All patrons who engage in disorderly conduct must leave, not just the instigator. I just talked about that. I got a little bit ahead. Basically, it's not just fighting, it's also patrons behaving in a way that disturbs other or the public peace. This is kind of some more contact information here. You can reach out to Enforcement Customer Service. There's a number there. But you guys being in Pullman, if you have an alcohol-related question, reach out to Officer Dale Goldman. He is the area officer for here for alcohol. That's his number written there. And then for cannabis, whether it's retail or non-retail, I know most of you guys are going to be the retailers listening on this. It's Officer John Christner, and that's his number as well. And if you have COVID-19 related questions, please reach out to them. We do have some information to send out to you guys. I know the latest governor's proclamations have raised a lot of eyebrows and we need some clarification. I just ask that you reach out to them because I have my 300 liquor licenses to deal with up in Spokane, and they can tailor their needs directly to you. This pretty much concludes the end of my presentation. I'm going to check my phone here. I don't see any questions, but if anyone on Zoom here wants to ask a question that happens to do with responsible liquor, cannabis, or tobacco sales, go ahead and fire away.
So I open up the panel so that participants can unmute themselves. So if anyone does have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Can you speak to any liability concerns for over-serving and then that person leaving and maybe getting an accident?
I just got a question actually from the commander over here, and he was asking about the liability of someone being overserved and leaving and getting in an accident. And just kind of run you through that scenario. So say someone, that does happen, bar XYZ overserves a patron, it's blatantly obvious, they leave that establishment, getting in a fatal DUI collision and kill, say, a car full of people, 4 individuals. Part of the State Patrol's investigation, they're actually going to call us out, and we're actually going to come to your premise, and we're going to do a thorough investigation and see if they were overserved. If there was an overservice, not only are you guys going to, you as the bar owner and potentially the mass permit holder, going to get in trouble legally, but there's going to be a huge liability where you're going to be sued by the families, and you know, there's going to be all kinds of civil litigations that you're going to be held responsible for that as well. So that's a great thing to touch on, that you can be held responsible for that. So do take it seriously, and you can tell patrons that too. You know, if you know, I overserve you and you leave here and get in an accident, I'm held liable for you. Does that answer your question, sir? Okay. So any other questions? If there's not any other questions, you can definitely reach out to me, myself, or any of their officers, and we'll definitely get you an answer. It may not be timely. Keep in mind, we're being inundated with all the COVID stuff right now, but we can definitely get you an answer. So appreciate you. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to clarify something. I get a lot of customers sometimes that say they have the right to be in the establishment. Can you maybe speak on that? You know, you're kicking them out and they're saying they have the right to be here, or you refuse them service.
So no, it's a great question. So no one has a right to be in a business in Washington. You have the right to refuse service to anyone. And also, being served alcohol in our state is a privilege, not a right. So there's nothing in my law books that says, you know, someone has the right to be in a premise, you know, or a right to be served alcohol. It is a privilege, and you as a business owner can make your own policies relating to that. You know, I don't think that's an infringement on anyone's First Amendment rights, you know, free speech, or any of their freedoms by you kicking them out for being disorderly or not behaving to your standards as a business. Chief, I don't know if you can touch anything on that, but there's nothing I know of that prevents an employer from denying service to a patron. Would you agree?
I agree. Yeah, no, they have complete control over their business and decide who they want to have in there and who they don't want to have in there.
So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Officer Lillard before we move on to Commander Opgenorth? All right, well, thank you, Officer Lillard. Really appreciate your presentation and providing your contact information. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Commander Jake Opgenorth. He oversees our operations at the police department. So Jake, it's all yours.
All right, let me get this set up real quick. Okay, so I guess I just wanted to start where the chief started, and that is when it comes to enforcement, our whole goal is compliance. So we always want to start with an education component. That's kind of what we're doing here now, to gain cooperation, gain compliance, and the last thing that we'll ever turn to is enforcement. So we're trying to do everything we can to avoid enforcement, but that's part of our job. We're the police. So if it comes down to that, you know, we will do that. So that being said, I think that you've already heard pretty much everything you need to know about the liquor and the cannabis laws. But as far as like, what can you expect from the Pullman Police Department, or what might we expect from the businesses? I think maybe we can touch on that a little bit. First, we hope that you do report all incidents of any kind of criminal nature. That's what we're here for. We'll respond and we'll take a report, and well, you know, we'll do as good of a job as we can do. Be a good witness. So if you do report something, all we ask is that you are a good witness. You give us the information. A lot of times security video helps in proving a case, and so it's great. I think we have awesome cooperation with all of our local businesses to get copies of video. So, you know, thank you for that. But I guess if I wanted to talk about bars and bouncers, what I've seen that we get a lot and we really appreciate is if there's a fight in a bar, it's great when the bouncers help us out. And by that, I mean, they kind of do crowd control. They kind of keep people away from us so we can deal with the person that might be resisting until we can get them under control and detained. You know, I watch body cameras from our officers when something like that happens, and I always appreciate it when I see the business immediately stepping back and just kind of keeping people away from our officers so that they're safe while they're focusing on somebody that's causing problems. So we really like that. At the same time, if somebody is wanting to fight or whatever, we do not expect you to help us with that person. That's not your job. And so, no, we don't expect you to jump in and I guess help us with somebody that's assaultive. Just watch our backs for us from everybody else. So that would, I guess, move me towards just the discussion about use of force. And I will say that we do get complaints here at the police department about bouncers using force on patrons of bars or whatnot. And my recommendation would be to not use any force unless somebody's being assaultive towards you or somebody else. In that case, yes, you should defend yourself. You should defend other people. But if somebody is simply just refusing to leave and you want them out of your business because for whatever reason you decided to I guess not serve them anymore, if they're not willing to leave, that's not an emergency, and I would suggest not going hands-on for a situation like that. That's a perfect time when you can call the Pullman Police Department. Our response times are pretty darn quick, so it's not like you're going to have to wait around a long time. An example that I could give is a few years ago, I went to a bar because there was somebody refusing to leave. He was obviously intoxicated and had been cut off and was to the point where he was just making rude comments to people, and other customers were not enjoying their time because he was there. So he needed to leave. The bartender called, I responded, and just after some conversation with him, I was able to get him to leave. You know, a lot of times when you're dealing with somebody that's been overserviced or they've had too much to drink, even if they came into your bar that way, they're not thinking right. They're not thinking clear. So it's hard to reason with them. And I'm sure most of you know this and have been there. But just do your best and make sure that they're aware of what's going on. You know, we would start off with, I would ask the person to leave the business. And if they say no, then I would move on to, you know, want to know why they were refusing to leave the business. And then I would reiterate, yes, you need to leave. And if you don't, then I give them the option. If you don't, then you will be arrested. And obviously you can't do that, but as a police officer, I can. And then I give them one more opportunity. Is there anything that I can say or do to get them to cooperate with me and leave the business on their own? And sometimes they might give me something very simple, or sometimes they just want to be a jerk and not leave, and then they get arrested. But bottom line is what I'm trying to say is at that point, if you have an employee, a bouncer, a bartender, whatever, you don't need to go hands-on with that person. You can call the police department. We can help you, or we can do the job for you to get them to leave. Don't risk yourself. Don't risk your business. Don't risk your safety on getting somebody that is doing nothing more than refusing to leave. Probably telling them that you're going to call the police if they don't go, I imagine, often helps. Maybe other times it makes it worse. But if you ever need any assistance in training as far as use of force or one-on-one training or in-person training for how to check IDs or just any other kind of security issues with your business, you just contact the Pullman Police Department. We'd be more than happy to meet with you and go over anything or any of these questions. It's kind of hard in this setting over the computer, but we can set up face-to-face meetings with small groups and we can get that done. Just touching on the compliance checks, I think you covered everything, but yeah, the thing that I would try to stress with everybody is that if we get 100% compliance after we do compliance checks, that is exactly what we'd like to see. We don't try to trick anybody. We don't try to be sneaky about it. In my opinion, when we have somebody that's undercover going in, they're underage, trying to buy tobacco, alcohol, you name it. To me, they very clearly do not appear to be of age. So as long as people are just doing their job, I don't think there's going to be any issues with that. I'll touch just a little bit on some of the issues with COVID. I know that currently, if I understand it right, the current restrictions are no alcohol service after 10 p.m. And I think the businesses can't be at, or have to be at 50% or less capacity, no more than 5 people to a seat, and they have to be from the same household. I anticipate moving in as we get busier with people and college kids returning to town, that we're going to probably see a lot of complaints of violations of that. And I guess this all comes back around to the Pullman Police Department is going to respond to complaints of any criminal nature. And so we will enforce the COVID restrictions and the government or the governor's proclamations. But again, we're always going to start with education and in hopes to get some kind of cooperation and compliance. But if it just comes down to it and that doesn't work, we will resort to enforcement. So let me just check my notes. I think I kind of covered everything. Chief, is there anything else that you wanted me to talk about?
No, and I've made it possible for participants to unmute themselves. So if there's any questions, feel free.
Hi. When we're talking about households and roommates, what's the situation with that? You know, you have 4 college kids come in and they all say they're in the same house. How do we deal with that?
Chief, is that for you or for me?
Well, my understanding is that there are specific guidelines for common living areas, but that in common living areas, they're not considered family household members. So there are examples given on the governor's website, essentially that when they're outside their bedroom and in common areas with people that are not their family members, then they're required to social distance and mask. Jake, is that your understanding too?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. And you know, it's really difficult when it comes to this COVID stuff because, I mean, this is new to everybody. It's not just new to you, it's new to us. And so, you know, the best thing I could say is just try to apply what we can in a reasonable way. So I don't have a way of proving if somebody is necessarily a household or not, but at the same time, it might be pretty obvious that they're not, and they're just saying that. So, you know, I guess I don't really have a good answer. And unfortunately, this is the same thing I would tell our patrol officers is just do your best. We know what the rules are to follow. How we're going to work with that is kind of a work in progress. Every time we go on a call is kind of new to us too. So we're just trying to be reasonable. And bottom line is we're trying to kind of, I guess, enforce the kind of the intent of the law here, that we're trying to just keep everybody safe and you know, socially distance and prevent the spread of COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, you're muted.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate our commitment to working with you to just ensure that you are planning and that we don't have to take any enforcement action and help you and your employees in the way that we can. So if that involves coming out to your business and working with them, but do that as well, or holding that one meeting, we'll do that too. So.
Chief, you're pretty garbled there. I couldn't understand you.